Hi everyone, welcome to the Inner Game of Change podcast, where we focus on exploring the multi-layers of managing organizational change effectively. Our guests cover a diverse number of critical topics to enable change adoption, including communication, leadership, training, change practice, process design, change capability, and much more. My name is Ali Jaman. Today I'm joined by Lena Ross to chat about her book, Change Management, The Essentials. Lena's work draws on the latest thinking in change management from areas such as design thinking, digital transformation, hardwired human behaviour, and agile practice. In this podcast, Lena shares her thoughts and tips from her playbook, which is designed for new and experienced practitioners. I am grateful to have Lena chatting to us today. Lena, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining the Inner Game of Change podcast.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. Lena, I'm grateful for your time. Today, I want to discuss your book, Change Management, The Essentials. But also I want to discuss quite a few things related to some of the articles you've written and including a white paper. And at the same time, I want to hear your thoughts around the current change practice and also where we're going in terms of where this practice is going in the future, especially in the next 2 to 3 years. So hopefully the listeners will walk away with some valuable information and some ideas that will trigger more discussion. And so talk to me, Lena, what inspired you to write the book?
A couple of things, really. I mean, it was the book that I wish I had when I started out in change.
Yeah. It's
the book I wish I had as I was working through change. And I just wanted a resource where a lot of things could come together. It answers a lot of the questions that people have been asking me over the past few years, people at the early part of their career, people wanting to get into change, and even people who are already experienced. So that's why it's called the playbook for new and experienced practitioners. So there is something in it for everyone. But I remember one of my early reviewers called it the Bible of Change Management, which I loved. And interestingly, not long after it was tagged, the Bible, one of the people who bought it in my pre-sales was actually a church minister. So see, it was really some sort of Bible.
Fantastic.
So I hope it's been valuable for that person as well as the other readers anyway.
Absolutely. I got the book a while ago, and I think I got it when you released it, and quite enjoyed it, and I've definitely utilized quite a few tools in it. Can you talk to me, how is the role of a change manager evolving nowadays?
Yeah, sure. It's like a lot of industries, Ali. It's always evolving.
Yes.
And there's external factors that drive that, as well as things that go on in the organisation. So it's a capability in its own right. When it first evolved, planned change was the way change was done. Change had a clear beginning, middle, and end. Waterfall-style change management frameworks served us really, really well. And we always had something at the end of our change process, which was, embed the change or institutionalize the change or reinforce the change. And I think what's evolving now is, as the environment's becoming more agile and complex and uncertain, as our organisations in response to that external environment is, I think the approach now to change is more, adapt, adopt, evolve, continue to adapt and iterate. So it's become like an ongoing cycle. So the role of the change practitioner in that is around focusing on adaptive change delivery rather than really following a prescribed approach. I think that served us very well for a long time. So it's to move away from that one way, same way, where for every change initiative I work on, I will deliver A, B, C, and D because it's on the Gantt chart and that's what I have to do. And that's when I started in change, that's what it was like. It was on a Gantt chart dictated by the project manager. You didn't really question it or ask why. Just thought it's there because they're following a process.
Of course.
And our change frameworks aligned to that, and you've probably been on similar programs.
Yes.
But I think the evolution now, Ali, is to deliver the right solution at the right time, to size and scope the change, and then adaptively deliver to what's going on in the environment at that time, and drawing on a range of tools and practices to do that. So
How is that going to be managed, knowing that some organizations or some change practitioners, they will join a framework, let's just say ProSci or any other framework, because those frameworks, they're pretty prescriptive, some of them. So how do we marry this? We're learning a framework, which we would like to follow, but then when we go to the real environment, it's anything but a straightforward process.
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's something that Dr. Jen Fram and I answer a lot, especially after we co-authored the Agile Change Playbook almost 12 months ago. So the approach that we suggest is, it's around managing your stakeholder expectations. But if you have a conversation very early with either the stakeholder or the project manager, or whatever those names are called in the agile environment, there's just so many names for these people, but the people that you need to please.
Yes.
If you talk to them about what are your objectives and key results, or in agile language, OKRs. What are your objectives and key results? Because what I want to do is I want to make sure that what I do in my change activity is going to help you achieve your OKRs. Yep. So if you start from a place of what's our common goal here, and then you come back to them with a framework or a change approach that marries to that and demonstrates how it's going to support those OKRs or key objectives and to achieve the benefit, I think you've almost circumvented the pain of having to talk about why you're not using an approach. And quite often, the approach that you have in an organisation, whether it's a prescriptive approach, there's usually a lot of adaptability now within these approaches. More and more, more change practitioners are saying we use that as our guide rails or our guiding principles, but we need to be a little more adaptive in what we do. And it could be that you do that and you draw on a range of tools and practices then to come up with what is your right size change approach. And then I think by starting from that place and that conversation early, you know that you're working towards the same goal. So you can avoid that whole angst sometimes that is around, or what's going to happen to me if I'm not following this framework, step by step.
Yeah. And so does that mean that the let's just call them the modern change practitioner? Does that mean that they
I think so.
Do they need to learn more about other fields that actually can help them with influencing stakeholders and really understanding? Are we going into other fields like psychology and all that stuff?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because to do what I've just explained does take a bit of confidence as well, and capability. You can be overconfident but not have the capability, and then
of course
vice versa. So I think the fields that we can learn a lot from, that I have learned a lot from. So I'm going to be a bit biased probably here in what I'm going to say.
Go for it.
Because these are the things that I'm passionate about that I have found have really helped me. Are things like brain science and understanding what's going on in the brain when we are exposed to change. Now, and that helps us introduce more brain-friendly communications, for example, and understanding that the brain gets very stressed with overwhelm. So your comms need to be as visual as possible and not really have more than 3 or 4 key messages at the one time. Understanding, because the brain craves certainty in a very, very uncertain world. What can you tell them that is going to remain the same, so they have a little comfort zone? And brain science is something that, 20 years ago we didn't know a lot about it. So when a lot of these other change frameworks are evolving and becoming mainstream, we didn't have those insights as to what the real human response, the hardwired human response was. Yeah. So that really helps, put another lens on change, as does design thinking. Design thinking and behavioural economics and positive psychology give us a framework where it's okay to talk about feelings. Whereas once upon a time, if you talked about feelings and vulnerability and how you felt and what you thought, or even problems, it was almost punitive. You were seen as a softie, or helps you focus on the problem first. Whereas we've all been exposed to leaders who've said to us, don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions.
Yes.
I'm guilty of being one of those leaders once upon a time, so I've learned a lot from that. So design thinking helps us really start with the user first and then take it out from there. So that is another really valuable. And obviously Lean and Agile give us a lot of insights into being iterative and being flexible and not being attached to a particular outcome and being responsive to what the customer wants rather than just having a fixed set of requirements.
Agree. Yeah. Behavioral economics, neuroscience, psychology, communication, all of those fields, and completing a certificate is a good first step. It gives us some tools, but there's so much out there, because the whole idea behind it is that when you deal with systems, it's a straightforward equation. When you deal with people, it's anything but straightforward. And sometimes you think you move the influence needle a little bit, and then a week later it goes backward. And also, I think I've been thinking about this the other day and with a couple of colleagues, and it's almost like we want to think about what type of personality is suitable really to be an effective change practitioner.
Yeah, I think given that there seems to be a real focus on adaptive now, and being able to let go of something that might not be working to try something different calls for someone like with a growth or agile mindset.
Yes.
And not getting too attached to outcomes or processes and responding to feedback rather than taking offense to maybe something not working and going with the flow, really. And that takes resilience as well. And it's something you can get better at. But it's hard. I think it's awareness is the first part of that if it's something that people are struggling with.
I love that, the awareness, yes. You mentioned the word agile change management.
Yeah.
So what is it, and how is it aligned with today's calls to take time? So we hear a lot today that because of what happened with COVID-19, there's a lot of talk and a lot of big asks from senior management to say, show a lot of empathy when we roll out change and take your time. So how is the agile change management aligned with what we're trying to achieve nowadays?
Yeah, it's a fine balance, isn't it? Well, agile, if we take agile change management, I mean, one of the things that Dr. Jen and I get asked a lot is, can you, what's the framework for agile change? And really the answer is think less about the framework and think more about the capabilities that are required around it, which are things like good engagement, good communication skills, and using data to inform your decisions.
Yeah.
So if I was, and one way I describe agile change management is so we can adaptively deliver the change activity or the change intervention to suit that change initiative. The other thing it is it draws on the ethos of the Agile Manifesto and the Agile, which are the 4 values and the 12 principles to guide us through what we do. So by drawing on that ethos, we understand that really that Agile Manifesto was so insightful at the time when it was developed for software development, but really has that application beyond for enterprise agility. And this is what a lot of our work now is trying to help leaders understand what that context looks like beyond software development and what it means for them and what role they play. So instead of an immature Agile leader who in the early days when Agile became quite big, they thought they could abdicate Agile to like a Scrum Master or an Agile coach. But now there's a much better understanding as they're becoming more mature that they're playing a role in that. So what does that mean for the actual leader? Yeah. And it does mean things like empathy. And while we've experienced COVID, everyone's experienced COVID. So this is a universal experience now that everyone can talk about. So when we work with clients overseas, we have like a common problem now or a common. Yeah, so we can all talk about how that made us feel and what we had to do, and what we were fearful of and what was challenging. And what happened in COVID in varying degrees was leaders had to do things very, very quickly, and they were forced to think about things that I think we've been trying to help them with for a long time pre-COVID. That is how to be adaptive and agile to something that's happened in your environment that's volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. Okay, so that's VUCA. And then along comes the pandemic and VUCA's gone on steroids. And the ones that weren't really prepared with the mindset to navigate an environment like that, it was fast. Some did it because they had to. So it was a great nudge for some people. That's why sometimes they're calling the pandemic a disruptor and an accelerant, because for some they just accelerated their skills and some floundered. And that's okay, because it's not a capability that everyone has, but it's a capability that we can build.
Yeah.
So what the good leaders have learned, and this is what we can learn from the good leaders. So when we do work with leaders, we say to them, we do a retrospective with them basically and say what worked well and what didn't, and how can you keep what worked well now instead of slipping back into your old ways as you emerge from the crisis. And it is things like, empathy and vulnerability. And let's face it, I don't think there's one leader in the world who can say, I knew what I was doing, because we know the last pandemic was 100 years ago. So no one can say, I've done this before.
Yes.
Well,
That's true.
not with that level of, not with that level of severity anyway.
Yeah.
So it put a lot of people on an even playing field as well. So a lot of leaders had to start saying, I don't know, and I don't know expresses vulnerability. So that opened up a lot of human-centered type conversations that weren't happening before, or there wasn't a forum for it. I don't know if I've answered your question. I've just started talking.
No, this is really good, because I think on a side note that what COVID-19 has uncovered, that leaders don't have all the answers. Although before that happened, there was an assumption that they need to know all the answers.
Yeah.
And some of them were very good at being open and admitting that they actually don't have the answers, but we're working through that as we progress. And I completely agree. From my experience, some leaders flourished. Their mindset is already prepared for this. And some leaders put their hands up admitting that we don't have all the answers. But as you mentioned, I think with any crisis, if it impacts everybody, then we have higher level of tolerance around if you actually don't have any answers, which is fine, and which puts the focus back on how can we utilize the change management practice to help us manage this disruption. And so in the scheme of things, I think in your book you mentioned the role of psychological safety. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Lena?
Yeah, look, I think we need to consider psychological safety also in the context of adopting an agile mindset and experimenting and doing these things differently. And it's critical now that everyone's in a return to work type phase in their organisation, at varying parts of that or various parts of the journey. But if we want leaders to either continue to be vulnerable or be more vulnerable or show more empathy, you need psychological safety for that. You need to feel safe saying, I don't know. Like you said, you could say, I don't know what's happening because the imposed change with the pandemic was so rapid and hit people quite quickly. But now as people go back into the workplace, they might want to preserve their status again and things like that and not feel comfortable being vulnerable. And I think it's a great opportunity to capture, as I said, what worked well for us through that period when most of us were in retreat or COVID retreat. And change practitioners, and this will take us to another conversation, I know, but change practitioners are often not in a position of formal authority, but they can influence.
Yep.
And they can influence by advising and by modelling behaviours. So I think things like some of the things that we ask change practitioners and change leaders to do is start having a conversation about psychological safety and what that looks like in your team and how will you do that? How can you respectfully challenge someone if you have a different view without feeling like, you can't speak up and things like that. And there's two of my favourite agile coaches highlight psychological safety a lot. I mean, one is Ben Linders from the Netherlands. He has done a lot of work in psychological safety with some cards and things to help teams open those conversations. We also have tools like that.
Great.
And there's a guy called Josh Kerievsky from the United States, he talks about the importance of psychological safety as one of the 4 things in his modern agile framework. So, and these are people who've identified this pre-COVID, but as you said, now with the pandemic lens on it, it's really important that we want to stay safe health-wise, but we also want to stay safe emotionally and look after each other, and probably taught us that humanity is quite fragile. You know, we have to look out for each other as well.
Absolutely. Humanity is quite fragile. We didn't really need pandemic to tell us that, but we learn the hard way sometimes as humans. Hey, Lena, that well said. When I read your book, I actually started thinking a lot about it. I talk a lot about empathy, but now it's put another layer to it that I need to continue thinking about when we work with our stakeholders. I think we touched on the point of human-centered designs. Are they more appropriate now than ever?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, what human-centered design gives us, Ali, are tools where we can have conversations with people about their thoughts and their feelings, and in a safe forum. So I'll use an example like the journey mapping, for example. If you bring you're impacted and it helps you see your employees as your internal customers as well.
Sure.
If you brought in your impacted employees into a room and talked about, for example, a current state process and how you want to unpack it, or a future state process, and process mapping up till now has been process focused because that's what it is. Now you're adding those other 2 lenses or swim lanes, if you like, in the template, which is, how you're feeling and what are you thinking, and therefore what are your pain points. You're actually inviting a conversation that might have never happened before. They might have never felt safe talking about. So it goes hand in hand with safety, because now you've got almost like a legitimate framework to do it. And sometimes I've had to say to stakeholders in organisations, look, let's have this activity with our employees, and we'll map the end-to-end process, but we're also going to try and uncover their pain points. Because sometimes if you say to your managers or your leaders in an organisation, I want to do design thinking, they'll roll their eyes or go, oh, here we go.
Yes.
They don't, especially if they don't understand what it is and they think it might be art and design or something light and fluffy. So sometimes I do it, but I use different language.
Yes. Yeah. Well said. The experiences that I've been involved in, we focus a lot on what we call change empathy, and that's what those activities give us. But as you mentioned, they usually uncover other areas and other things that the leaders would need to be aware of as well. So although you're really narrow in your scope sometimes, but then you want to capture the other conversations that usually happen in those sessions. And I'm with you. It's a must to have now if we ever have a chance of rolling out any successful change.
And look, I think employees are expecting more too, aren't they, with the employee experience?
So.
I mean, they're more mobile and can take their talent elsewhere.
Yeah.
So you need to make their experience more enjoyable so they stay with an organisation. It costs money to bring in new employees all the time and look for them and stuff like that.
Absolutely. And so we expect, because of COVID, actually, also one of the side effects is that we expect a certain level of communication now. We expect a certain level of change empathy from the organizations. And we expect to be guided through changes. And more than ever, we really need to understand the why behind the change as well. Talk to me about the current change management models. Are they fit for, impact, and do they need to upgrade?
I think they, like all models, they just need to be appraised through the lens of what's happening today. I mean, after I thought about change management models today, Ali, and I thought, out of curiosity, I'll Google it, change frameworks, and I got 77 million results. So there's a lot out there. And there's so many different models, isn't there, out there? There's models for an organisational level, like John Cotter's 8 steps.
Yeah.
There's models to help us understand how individuals experience change, like Bridges transition personal transition model and Kubler-Ross, and there's pros and cons for all of them. And I think a good change practitioner would know the main ones. I think it's great to understand how our practice has evolved and how those models were so solid and played a really good role for us in an era of planned change in a stable environment. And there will be some changes that are introduced in some organisations that are stable, predictable changes that are simple, and some of those models will still serve okay. I think the art of being a good change practitioner and art and science, is to understand to broaden the toolkit, and things like, the things I talked about before, like design thinking and brain science and agile and lean and positive psychology. And you mentioned, psychology and behavioural economics and things like that. And I use this metaphor now, and you probably remember it from my book about the sushi train.
Yes.
And now we are in a sushi restaurant, and those models and frameworks that served us well for so long are on the conveyor belt with all the new things. And what we need to do to be really good adaptive change practitioners is decide, what do we need now for this particular change, which goes back to that earlier conversation about what are the objectives and key results, what do I need to deliver. I'll go over, have a look at my toolkit, I'll get, this and this out, put the rest away. Might need that tomorrow or for my next change initiative, but for now, this is going to deliver what I want. If something's not working, I'll go back to my toolkit and see what I can iterate or redo. So it's that, and that's a mindset too, isn't it, as well as a capability?
Yes, absolutely. Look, it is a mindset. You mentioned the sushi train analogy, and I really like that. So I encourage all the listeners to, first of all, get your book. Second thing, it's really a good, not only for starters, but also experienced change managers. And I highly recommend that book. Lena, there's a lot of talk nowadays around digital transformation.
Sure is.
It's a common thread. It's everywhere. What do change managers as well as organizations need to be aware of when we talk about digital transformation? And the reason why I'm asking this question is that the word transformation, it triggers a threat impact in the brain when we're in the middle of a pandemic, and then yet organizations still dare to use the word transformation. Is it easier to say improvement instead of transformation?
Possibly. It probably depends what their starting point is and
Sure.
where they want to go, and how big is that gap. But when I talk about digital, I kind of put a different spin on it, and I say, look, if you're a change practitioner, having digital literacy helps when you work on digital transformation.
Of course.
But also be mindful that while organisations employ people, all types of change require people to do something differently, whether it's interacting with technology for the first time or interacting with existing technology differently or using a different type of technology. So all change is still about people. And I say to change practitioners, don't get lost in the sizzle of digital and technology and AI and robotics and all that. The buzz around digital overall shouldn't distract us from an employee experience or a user experience, which is still, we shouldn't take our eye off what are we really about. We're there to help people adopt, and that's still the human thing. And sometimes I think all the talk about digital almost dehumanizes an organization, like their focus is all on techie stuff, and it's not really. That's just my thoughts.
We want to talk more about humanizing digital transformation rather than it's about technology, because the human being is the same human being we're dealing with.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the focus is really around how digital transformation is going to make my life easier and a customer's life better. So that's really the aim of it. I keep thinking about the word transformation, and we keep hearing that organizations got a change fatigue, and yet we still use the word transformation, which is a big word. As you and I know, that the power of words
Totally.
And the influence we have when we talk to our stakeholders, and it all comes in the power of words, and whether we trigger a positive impact or a negative impact. And I think you mentioned also something really important. It's not the technology. It's the change experience at the end of the day that you want to create when you roll out a change. And so that's why nowadays we think that one of the success factors for a change program is actually how do you measure the change experience at the end of the day? Because the way you roll out a change may impact engagement negatively or positively, the way you communicate it and the way you engage with people as well. You've written together with Dr. Jen Fram, you've written a white paper, and I love it. It's got a couple of sections in there, predominantly talking about influence and talking about behavioral economics and behavioral science. It's pretty much what you're saying in them, that change practitioners are influencers and relationship builders. Is that right?
Yeah, it's one of the questions, Ali, that we get asked a lot, is when people get frustrated with stakeholders, particularly senior stakeholders, or as I said before, the people we need to please.
Yes.
There's also some frustration, and they don't feel that they can influence. Look, sometimes we can't influence. Sometimes it's about building the relationship first. So there's so many different paths to influencing. But what we wanted to convey in that white paper was that we're probably better at influencing than what we think, because a lot of us think that we need formal authority or a title or a position on the org hierarchy to influence. And this is an area that's also a lot of research is pointing to different insights, which we wanted to draw out in the white paper. The white paper, anyone can download that from the Agile Change Leadership Institute's website, so that's easy to access. What we talk about there, though, is the power of modelling behaviours. We're hardwired to mimic other people. So if you do something really differently, you can have an impact. And I'll use an example for that what I did in a moment. We can also find informal influences across the organisation, the people who are good networkers, connectors, good on the enterprise social network, which is a social media. So they have social capital, and they are good at helping you spread the influence. I mean, often that's an untapped stakeholder that we use. So it's always about finding what I call the hidden influences. But I have an experience where I was working on a very short piece of work in a large organisation, and impact had to be made, and I used design thinking as part of that impact. But what I did was I worked out loud, and working out loud means that I was actually showing my work, and I had times of the day that I allocated to have the work I was doing up on a big whiteboard, and people could just drop in and out and ask me about it. It was a new change framework, but it was designed to improve the user experience. So it wasn't just the change people who were my stakeholders. Every employee in this organisation was my stakeholder. That's the way I wanted to. Of
course, yes.
I want to know how you want to feel at each step of this framework, and what kind of puts you in threat mode and what makes you feel good. So we did it through the lens of a journey map. But it was the experience of working out loud that got interest, which spread to the leaders, because the leaders said, "What are you doing?" Like, I saw this thing outside the window of this. We had this common area we could use it was like a common. You could move walls and facilitate in a small area, big area, and it was a great. It was called the Hub. It was a great area. And outside the Hub, there was always a sign as to what was going on. And there was a sign there that says, "Lena is working out loud on these times and days." And I would have people come up to me and go, what's working out loud? What are you doing? And I'd say, well, this is what it is. But drop in so you can see, so you can experience it and see what's happening. And then I had people coming up to me going, "Can you help me do this? Because I want to do this." So that's a way of influencing without authority.
Of course.
I hardly knew anyone. I was only there for 6 weeks. I knew I had to do something quickly. And the way to get something that was going to hit the ground was to involve everyone. But I wasn't expecting that. That's why that was a lovely surprise and a lovely way that taught me, oh my God, you can really influence just by doing stuff.
Working out loud, you would have worked on creating something, and then you wanted to share it, and people got curious about it, and that was your way of influence. I completely agree. There's always a network of informal influences in any organizations. Mm-hmm. In fact, one thing that I've learned, somebody told me ages ago, the people that impact the team emotionally are the real leaders. So you don't need an authority. When I heard that maybe 10 years ago, I see it again and again in every organization. There are people that emotionally impact the team, but they don't have an authority. What did they call them? What, leaders with no titles? And but I think one of the things that which I'm spending a lot of time trying to understand and apply in my practice around the behavioral economics. It's an evolving field, and there are some great books out there. There's The Nudge, there's Customers Misbehaving, Taylor's written a book, and you mentioned that in your paper as well. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, we talk about nudge theory and how, and you mentioned before, Ali, how even language can have so much influence. Mm-hmm. And we're not talking about the dark arts here and making people do things they don't want to do.
And no manipulation either.
No, it's all highly ethical. But, for example, if I use the word change fatigue and then I reframe that to, building change resilience, that is probably going to make people feel a lot more positive about change. Rather than if I use the word fatigue and then when someone says fatigue to me, I'll start to think about feeling tired. It's what the brain does. Mm-hmm. So you can influence people through subtle ways like that. A typical example of nudge theory is when you go on a website and you want to subscribe to something and there's 3 options, and usually you'll take the middle option. And they drive you towards that. And there's a word for that.
That's a choice architecture.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. And it's very powerful. Mm-hmm. And people have studied it for a long time. And even things like nudging people to walk upstairs. We've all seen pictures going around on social media about the stairs light up or they look like a piano and things like that to make people walk up the stairs rather than take the elevator for health, or putting the healthy food at the front in front of the kids in a cafeteria and have the chips behind you. Little things like that. So if you can find ways to nudge people in change, that is a great way to go, because you take them on a journey in a direction, but there's a lot of positive intent with it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the whole idea, I think, is that people and customers and whoever you want to influence, they're not stupid people. I think we just want to find the best possible way to influence ethically, and also give options as much as we can, so they can make some decisions. And nudge is everywhere. Everywhere you go. In fact, a roundabout is a nudge. Yeah, and street signs are nudges. The traffic light is a big nudge, but what we actually call, there's a nudge and there's a push and there's a shove. So the traffic light, they're a bit of a push. One is self-regulated, so you're actually leaving it to people to manage their way around a roundabout. And one is a forced one. and so it is. And so then you think, well, that's a nudge. And so sometimes in organizations, if you leave people to navigate their own way and you leave them a little bit, like in a roundabout, you're probably going to get better results rather than the hard stop traffic.
And you raised a good point before. You talked about options and giving people a choice. And we know through the brain science that autonomy is critical. So if you can give people even like a couple of choices in your change program, maybe dates and times to attend some training, or do, small things make a big difference, because the reward center in your brain is activated when you have choice. So these are really small things that make a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And the level, we always value a level of autonomy, and autonomy gives us those options as well. Lena, what's the future of change management over the next couple of years? I talk about I talk about the couple of years because nothing is certain after that.
It's getting harder, isn't it, to predict that? Well, look, I've got a whole chapter in the book called Change is Changing, but it's,
Great.
And as I reflect on that chapter, nearly a year and a half after I've written it, I still think it's quite relevant to the future of change management. I've done a follow-up blog on my website with a post-pandemic lens, so what change management might look like in a post-pandemic world, but it still plays to those themes, and they go like this. They go like, let's work with principles rather than a prescribed formula, so you don't get too attached to a way of doing things, so you can shift and be more less planned and more iterative, right? That leaves the mind open for continuous learning as well, and iteration and experimenting. So that's a real mindset based one. We've talked about empathy, and I see empathy as playing a much bigger role in change. And I talk about from engagement to empathy. And a couple of people have said to me, well, we still have to engage, and we do. It's engagement with empathy. So it's not like don't do any engagement anymore. It's just engage with empathy. And design thinking gives us tools to do that.
Yes.
We can position. One thing I think that will happen in the future is as we start to make these shifts, when there's critical mass and more change practitioners start to make these shifts, I think we'll start to be valued as change advisors or trusted advisors rather than change practitioners. And I think that's an important shift because it sounds less transactional. It sounds more value add. So we go from process-centric practitioner to a human-centered or people-centered trusted advisor. Maybe I'm being a bit. I'd like to predict that because I guess it's where I think it would be great to land, and I hope that's where it is.
And it's actually happened to me already. I was working on a specific program, and I was called for an input and advice by a couple of other senior managers, completely unrelated to the program. And you were right. I was together with managers from people and culture, and they sought our advice on, from change, from human resources and all that stuff. And so that's already happening. But I think that comes with trust in the change practitioners, and it's almost like a professional wisdom when it comes to those conversations. But yeah, absolutely. I think that will be, I don't think we will stop doing what we actually do, but there will be an added value that organizations will look for in a change practitioner. So I completely agree with that. And if that's your wishful thinking, it's already happening, and hopefully it'll happen more.
That's good.
Yeah.
And now is a great time, isn't it, Ali, as there's return to work. The return to work programs are often tasked to the human resources team. And I think now is a great opportunity for change practitioners to maybe reach out and say, hey, this is being tagged the greatest workplace disruptor, the hybrid working and all the things that need to be considered now. And, it'll be a great time to say, as we emerge from this pandemic retreat or an opportunity, how can we help you? Where this is where our expertise is, please feel free to tap into it without stepping on their toes.
Great point. Lena, we're coming to the end of our wonderful chat. What key messages would you like to leave their change practitioners with? Yeah.
Look, I think to sum up, because the key messages have probably come up, is, experiment bravely. Now there's no better time than now to come out and say, let's try this, and manage stakeholder expectations and say, let's try this out. Let's get our people on board, and being courageously curious and having that beginner's mindset where it's okay to say, look, I don't really know, but let's work through this together. And, try and make things safe with that type of language. Learn fast. Learning is your superpower now. Don't wait for your organisation to go and send you on a course or tell you need to, You need to do A, B, and C. Get on the front foot and be proactive and own your capability. And, of course, don't underestimate your ability to influence without formal authority by being who you are.
Wise words. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Lena. I really appreciate.
Thank you.
I appreciate your time. We're going to put all the information and how people can reach you in the podcast info, and hopefully in the future we can have you again and talk about a new book, a new adventure they're actually going on. But there's so much to talk about, and perhaps one of the fields I really want to explore going forward is the behavioral economics. So perhaps at some stage I'll get you back and we just focus on that.
Yeah, that and brain science is a big passion of ours too, both Jen's and my own. Yeah.
Great. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time, Lena.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for having me. I will look forward to hearing all your episodes. And again, love the name, In a Game of Change. Fantastic stuff. Keep up the good work, Ali.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed listening to this podcast with Lena Ross. To know more about Lena and this podcast, check the innergameofchange.com.au website. To receive more podcasts, simply subscribe. In our next podcast, we will meet with another change management specialist who will share their thoughts and ideas on change practice, communication, and learning. Until then, stay well and stay safe.